Hi friends, my name is Bo Sanders. I wanted to take the next couple minutes and talk to you about our culture of conflict. It's something that I have studied both academically and now professionally, and I wanted to provide for you a rubric that I have found helpful, that I've sort of developed as I've watched things since 1998. I first read the book Argument Culture by Deborah Tannen, and things have only gotten worse since then. And as I have gone through sort of a sociology of religion, I figured out that there is a perfect storm brewing. So if you remember that analogy of the perfect storm, it was three storms that came together and conflated in a really deadly way. And so you may have seen the book or the movie, but that's going to be our framing analogy. So our three little storms, the first is individualism. You know, in the last 500 years, individualism has become a predominant worldview or a mental framework by which people imagine themselves and their lives. It's a story, a narrative that we tell ourselves, and it manifests, in capitalism, in this consumerism that we participate in. But if you talk with people or have access to those who come from a more communal or family or even tribal understanding of identity and personhood, this individualism is our first little storm. It provides the context in which these other things come together. The second little storm is that we have all of these remnant structures or remainders or fragments of previous mentalities or institutions or ways of doing things, all of these remnants in our systems of power from previous ways, and those are not reconciled with what we're currently asking them to do. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Our third little storm is that things have expanded and are so oversized and sort of outgrown our capacity to understand them. So few of us can explain like cell phones or the internet or the economy and how these things work, let alone things like the electoral college for our presidential election and stuff like that. So things are so outsized and overgrown that they become larger than the scope that we can comprehend and explain. So when these three things come together, individualism, remnant structures or institutions fragmented from previous ways of doing things, and then the fact that things are oversized, those three things come together in a perfect storm. To continue our analogy, we have another problem, which is that the water itself has warmed. And this I attribute to the 24-hour news cycle and social media. There is a new level of intensity where the water has warmed, and so there's an animosity, an agitation, a level of conflict, adversarial mentality that has really heated up the situation. So you have your perfect storm, you have the warming water, and then you need a trigger of real crisis. And so for many, the crisis comes when they feel alienated from the ability to change whatever it is that we're talking about. When people feel alienated from the power to make a change or an influence, they become resigned. There's a resignation that sets in, like, what can one person do? So I've talked a lot about this. Earlier this summer, I did a 4-part series, why things seem so bad right now, fragmented and fractured. There's no such thing as neutral anymore, and everyone is for themselves. I'll link to those. You can go and read those. Each of those are a 10-minute video, but I wanted to run a couple test cases by you. So the first is like the Second Amendment, gun rights. If you use my framing metaphor as like a rubric or a scheme to analyze, an analytic tool, so you have people who focus on the individual, probably the individual gun owner. You have a remnant or a fragmented system, a remainder from a previous thing in the Second Amendment that talks about militias. And now we're trying to figure out how it applies to this oversized, which is our third element, of assault rifles and the militarization of nearly everything. So those three things are present in this one issue of the Second Amendment. Then you have the heated water, the warming water, so that's present. And then you have the trigger, which is that people are fearful that they don't have the ability either to change the situation with mass shootings, or that the government is going to come and take their weapons. And so when you look at my little schema here, the Second Amendment takes on a different light, and I start to be able to understand people for whom this issue really matters. And I'm not a Second Amendment person myself, so it helps me to put myself in their shoes and try and understand what their concern is. This works for abortion. And the difference in that one is that some people focus on the individual unborn life, and some people focus on the individual life of the mother, but everything else except for those two things remains the same, that you have this remnant power or remainder of a previous system of understanding both women's bodies and essential things about gender. You have the oversized things that have outgrown our capacity to understand them in the biological realm. In that case, you have the warming water and the intensity of the heated rhetoric, and you have this alienation from the power to fix or correct what you view as the problem. You can do it with police policies, the same thing. And so people, when we talk about these policing crises, we can talk about the individual police officer in Blue Lives Matter, or the unarmed black men often that we see in the news, and then everything else that follows. It seems to me that this perfect storm analogy is a good framing metaphor for looking at different issues and analyzing them differently, especially when you add in the warmed water and then the crisis that triggers the situation or sparks it. And so I would love to hear from you if you would use this analogy to look at an issue that it matters to you, or maybe frustrates you, or maybe something you haven't understood. I would love to compare notes and see if you find it as helpful as I have. You can email me, you can comment on Facebook, you can comment on the blog post, you can comment on YouTube below the video, and I'll be watching those. And I would love to know if you found this helpful, or if there's any way that I could make it stronger and maybe account for and attend to an element that isn't in this recipe so far. Okay. I hope that you have a good day. I'll look forward to comparing notes soon.